Okay, everyone. So we'll start with the lecture. Rashmi, you can begin.
Alright. So we'll start now. Hello everyone, welcome to the BCS introductory lectures. So today we have introductory lecture on three topics, neuroscience, psychology and AI. So first up we have neuroscience. Next slide please. So in the first part of this lecture, we'll learn about neuroscience, the absolute basics of neuroscience, and these will be very useful for you if you continue at BCS. Do note that this lecture is being recorded, and the recording along with these slides that we are presenting, they will be shared for later reference. So you can learn from them independently whenever you wish to. So yeah, we'll start with this now. Over to Siddhant.
Okay, so let's begin with the topic of neuroscience. What is neuroscience? It's basically a subfield of biological and computational science which studies the brain and the nervous system. And, and then you must be wondering, why is neuroscience important and what do neuroscientists do? Neuroscientists basically study the cellular, behavioral, and computational aspects of the nervous system. Researchers look into the brain activity of the people with ailments such as Alzheimer's disease, ADHD, Down syndrome, and many others. And what this does is that it helps them to collect data and then further advance the medical facilities available to treat these various disorders. Modern neuroscience in itself is a very ancient subject, but the modern aspects of neuroscience are a relatively new and important field with implications for every aspect of how people move, think, and behave. Now, there are various subfields of neuroscience. Some of the most important ones are listed here. One of them is behavioral neuroscience, which studies how the brain functions affects the human behavior. Another one is cognitive neuroscience. This looks at how the brain forms and controls the thoughts. And then there is computational neuroscience, which uses computer tools to stimulate and model the brain functions. And then, last but not the least, neuroimaging, which is used to diagnose diseases and collect data from the brain. Now, let's discuss some of the important milestones and some mysteries that are yet to be solved in the field of neuroscience. One of such mysteries are the mystery of yawn. Now, yawning is such a common activity in our daily lives, but still, it is unclear that what activity in the brain, what neural activity in the brain, actually causes us to yawn. Uh, but one fact that we know for sure is that yawning is very contagious. Experiments have been done by the researchers, and it's been found that yawning is contagious. Another important research was done on neurogenesis. Neurogenesis basically means creation of a neuron. Most of us have heard that, or we were taught that neurons only develop until a certain age, but that's not completely true. Neurons in some part of the brain, specifically a part which is called hippocampus, this part helps us in memorizing and storing the information, and it's been found that this part of the brain in this part of the brain neurons can develop within the whole lifespan of humans. Research has been done, and some parts of the hippocampus have been found to develop neurons even till the age of the death of the person. Then another milestone that we have achieved is the even after development of science, we live in an era of such a huge development, right? Such a vast potential of science, and still, yet there are some brain structures and brain cells which were discovered only recently. Then, last topic which I would like to share with you all is that Google's DeepMind, researchers at Google's DeepMind, which is basically an AI, it is such a powerful AI that it has beaten many human professionals at their own game, such as arcade games like Go and even more complex games like chess. And researchers at Google's DeepMind have published a research that putting the putting the AI through a state which is in a kind of way, it is similar to the state of brain when we sleep. And they have found that this improves their performance. Such a fascinating fact. Over to Nakul.
So let's talk about the neuron. Basically, please change the slide. Basically, a neuron nervous system is consist of basically two types of cells: neuron and glial cell. Neurons are basically a basic structure which transfer electric signal from one neuron to another, and glial cell is basically a supporting cell which helps to information processing in the brain. Let's see the structure of neuron. A neuron consists of basically a cell body, which also called soma. From there, you can see the emerging dendrites, which collect the signals from the previous fire neurons and transfer to the next neuron, basic through a years long axon. After that, you can see on myelin sheet, which basically protect the inform signal from the outside noise. um Basically, in the human brain, we have about 100 billion neurons and many synapses. Synapses is simply a most important part of the brain, which there is information coded in the synapses. Basically, let's see how the signal transform from one neuron to another. It's basically happen through a action potential. Basically, it's basically a current of sodium and potassium is happen. Basically, inside the inside the basically inside the cell body, there is a concentration of potassium is higher, and outside the cell body sodium is greater. It's about minus 70 micron millivolts is action potential. Resting potential is uh, happened if by some mean by some mean if by some mean potential is become minus 55 volts, then sodium gates are opened and it creates the it's create the basically it's create the open the wall and create the action potential, which helps to transfer the signal. Basically, membrane of the neuron is related like a capacitor, which helps is like a store and separate charges in basically I please stay in the slide. Basically it's, so you can see the here, if this inside the potential become minus 55 volt, then the sodium gates are open and depolarization will happen, and it causes the decrease in increase in potential, and at 30 volts so potassium gates will open, and it's create the repolarization of the repolarization, and the potassium leaves, and this is how the signal transform from one place to one neuron to another. Change the slide. Action potential is repeatedly regenerated along the length of the axon, and fire this is this basically it's the firing of the neuron. Thus change the slide. So you can see the simulation of how the neuron signal is transferring from the one in one neuron. Change the slide. This is the basic heart of the basic main thing for synapses. Yeah, here you are seeing the transmitters. Basically, in synapses, the pre and post synaptic membranes are separated by a synaptic cleft. Chemical event involved in the transmission of the impulse is via release, diffusion, and receptor binding of a neurotransmitter molecules, and unidirectional communication between neurotransmission at a chemical synapses began with arrival of axon potential at the presynaptic axon terminal. Synaptic vesicle diffuses with the presynaptic axon terminal membrane and empty their content in a synaptic cleft. Their content consists of a neurotransmitter which is small molecule that diffuses across the synaptic cleft and attached to the transmit receptor of the on the postsynaptic cell. Neurotransmitter diffuses across the synaptic cleft and binds to a ligand-gated ion channels in the postsynaptic membrane, resulting in a localized depolarization of the postsynaptic neuron that result in a transmission of the spike on the postsynaptic cell. So on this gates if increase up, it is basically a Hebbian's theory also tells this. If the number of ligand gated channel increase, then the bond between the two neuron increases. That's the neurons which fire together that wire together. If the consistent more firing is happening, then the more ligand gated ion channels will increase, and which change the slide. And basically there are two types of this is the image of a electron microscope image of chemical synapses. Chemical synapses very small, about 40 nanometers is very small, and their vesicles you are seeing that's that carrying a neurotransmitter. See in the side. These are a few new neurotransmitters. There are the many neurotransmitters. Recent research is also going to find new neurotransmitters. Basically, neurotransmitter of two types: exhibitory or inhibitory. Exhibitory neurotransmitters like a dopamine, which helps to which help promote the generation of electric signals, which helps in extend potential, and inhibitory transmitter prevent it. And thank you. And now Suyas will continue.
Hi, I'm Suyesh, and I'm going to talk about the neuron as the computational unit of the brain. Like, there are majorly going to be two themes in my talk. Like, first of all, I'll try to compare how the brain works as compared to the artificial engineered systems that we have created. And we're going to try to understand how the structure and the function of the brain help it in order to create these huge computations, which we are still trying to understand. Please move on to the next slide. Okay, so here you see a comparison between a neuron and a computer, right? So the human brain and a computer. So the human brain contains about 10 billion neurons, right? And on average, each neuron is connected to around 10,000 synapses, which it uses to be connected to other neurons, right? And you can see this is such a huge interconnected network. So it forms a really massive information processing system, right? So let me go over some differences between the brain and artificial systems. Right. First of all, I'd like you to understand what an artificial system is. Not only a computer; it can be a mechanical system or an electrical system, right? So, for most engineered systems are brittle. Like their performances, if they fail, right? As compared to that, the brain responds gracefully to partial damage. If you remove some arbitrary part, like if you remove some arbitrary part of the brain, a small part of the brain, it is possible that some other parts of the brain will take up the slack left behind, right? The brain can learn, right? That's a really important. We're now are we starting to build like artificial neural networks that have the same ability to learn. So that's a really important property of the brain. And one of the things that the brain is really good at is performing these huge computations very efficiently. Just the way that the neurons are wired in the brain is such that it is very efficient at what it does. Like not only the power of the brain is outstanding, it's the amount of energy it takes and the efficiency with which it performs these calculations is also astounding, right? For example, complex visual perception occurs within the brain in less than 100 milliseconds. Right, so that is really great. And the biggest property of the brain, it supports our intelligence and self-awareness. Nobody actually still has completely understood how the brain is able to, like, how a collection of neurons is able to do such a great thing. And understanding this is one of the most exciting adventures of modern science. Now, please move on to the next slide. So in this picture, we are going to see how a single neuron, like we went over how a neuron works shortly before in Nakul's slides, right? So here we're going to see gain some insight into how it works, right? So in this picture, we see summation, signal summation at the axon hillock, right? A single neuron receives two kinds of inputs, right? Excitatory inputs and inhibitory inputs. As we went over this shortly before, and all of these inputs get added together, right? At the center of the main computing region of the nerve cell, right? And if the excitatory inputs are strong enough to then they are like you can see that there are two opposing forces, right? So if the excitatory inputs are strong enough to overcome the inhibitory inputs, a certain threshold is reached and the neuron fires. What I mean by the firing of the neuron is that it allows the signal to go through to the next layer of neurons, right? So here you can see it's written that the neuron acts as a temporal and spatial indicator of signals. That sounds fancy, but what it really means is that the neuron is able to sum the signals which it receives across space. Like the signals that it receives can be from different points in space due to the different locations of the synapses, and they can be separated in time, right? It's that's a really interesting property of the brain, that short like signals which are separated by short intervals in time also get added together within the neuron, and that is part of what makes the neuron so powerful at computation. Please move on to the next slide. So one a question that naturally arises is why, like, I'm not interested in the brain. Why am I doing this? Like, how does this help technology, right? So studying how biological neurons work has helped us like immensely in our efforts to create these powerful artificial systems, like specifically artificial neural networks, which are really good at computing, right? That they can learn and they can do things that the previously machines could not. So here we are going to see the differences between a biological and an artificial neuron. So the artificial neuron is nothing more than really a mathematical function, and still you can see the structural similarity in both of them in this diagram. Like you can see the biological neuron above and the artificial neuron below, right? You can see the synapses and the corresponding parts, right? So at the simplest level, an artificial neuron is composed only of weights, biases, and an activation function, right? And as a mathematical function, it takes in, like if we consider it only as a mathematical function, it's a function which takes in multiple inputs and gives a single normalized output, right? Which is based on the weighted sum of its inputs, right? So these weights, like you must have heard of weighted averages, right? So the weights in this weighted sum correspond to synapses, right? And the bias, which is an offset value which the neuron adds, is unique to each neuron, right? So you're going to have to note that even this simple model of a neuron, like simple computational model of a neuron, is incredibly powerful. We can do a lot of things just based on these three things: weights, biases, and the activation functions, as the AI people will show you later in the lecture. Right. But I'm going to talk about some of the biological shortcomings of this model, right? So some of the important, most of the neural networks which we use today do not exhibit two important properties of our actual brain. One is that the number of neurons and the connections amongst these neurons stays the same in artificial neural networks, which is something that the brain is really good at. The brain, like neurons, like we just saw, like Siddhant told you in his section of the slide, that neurogenesis is something that is like it's still something we're trying to understand, right? How neurons are made and how these new connections help the brain to learn and to get better at the cognitive tasks that it does, right? And the second property of the brain, which these artificial neural networks do not have, is, as we saw, the neuron is a spatial and a temporal integrator of signals, right? So we have managed to capture the spatial sense of these spatial connections extremely well, right? But we're still developing neural networks which can understand these temporal separations in the input signals, and that is what the latest generations of neural networks are trying to achieve, to actually make neurons that are like spatial as well as temporal integrators of signals, right? Like the big ass picture that you can see here, like what is pictured is the Loihi 2. It's Intel's latest neuromorphic chip, right? It's designed to mimic natural, like the brain's hardware, and if its marketing materials are to be believed, it will be the next big revolution in computing. So it's something to look out for. Please move on to the next slide. So we're going to talk about how the separate parts of the brain and how they work together to like give rise to brain function, right? So the brain is broadly divided into three parts. both by structure as well as function, the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain, right? So here we are going to choose to focus on the forebrain as it's responsible for the sexiest of brain functions, right? Vision and all of that. So we're shortly going to see what cognition is, and the forebrain is majorly responsible for cognition, right? But however, you need to bear in mind that the human brain is mind-bogglingly complicated, and multiple parts of the brain are involved even in a single brain task, right? So it's not all as cut and dried as this diagram would suggest to you. But with that in mind, let's move ahead and see the forebrain is by far the largest part of the brain, right? The cerebrum is again the largest part of the forebrain, right? And the cerebrum alone accounts for 85% of brain mass, right? It's the part of your brain which controls things, amongst a lot of things, important things like muscle control, thought, and learning, right? The limbic system works with the cerebrum, which is another part of the forebrain, to control our emotions and behavior, especially critical behaviors like reproduction or flight and fight responses, right? I'd like to end my section by telling you that we have learned more about the brain in the last 10 years than in literally all of the preceding centuries, and that is mind-boggling, right? And research still continues at an astounding pace. So these advances, and especially when we think of the implications in technology that learning about neuroscience could bring us, it's really exciting. Like there are technologies like brain-computer interfaces and applications of neuroscience in robotics, right? So let's move ahead to the next section, cognition. I'd like to hand it over back to Siddhant.
Okay, so now let's learn about what cognition and behavior is. What is neuroscience? What is cognitive neuroscience? Which is, if you remember, then it's the subfield of neuroscience. And why is it important? So before we get into cognitive neuroscience, let's first understand what is cognition. Cognition is basically the mental process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and senses. For example, you acquire information on the basis of your vision, right? That's a form of cognition. Now, then, what is cognitive neuroscience? It's the study of connections within the brain. It helps in determining how the brain achieves the functions it performs. Example, decision making. So you see something and then you decide, right? So some connections in your brain get activated when you see something or when you are in a particular situation, and then the brain functions help you to perform according to the situation that you're in. So basically, it's a task. The task of cognitive neuroscience is actually to determine how the brain creates the mind. Okay. Now let's learn about another subfield of neuroscience, that's behavioral neuroscience. It's the field of neuroscience which helps to establish a correlation between the brain and human behavior. That is, how does your brain or the functions in your brain manifest into the environment? How do they get translated into the environment and into the human behavior, to be precise? Advancements in this field will help us to assess, understand, and control the human behavior. It's a very important field of neuroscience. Over to Rashmi. Is Rashmi present?
Oh, sorry, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah. Okay. So we learned what happens between neurons, right? But how do we know which neuron is working and which one is just chilling, right? So in comes neuroimaging. Neuroimaging are basically techniques to image the structure and function of nervous system. We can use neuroimaging observations for finding a correlation between behavioral activities and physiological states. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about 4 very common techniques of neuroimaging, which you probably have heard before too. First is MRI, or the magnetic resonance imaging. It makes use of magnetic field and radio waves. fMRI stands for functional MRI, and there's a small difference between the two, which we will discuss in the later slides. Next is another very common technique called the CT scan or the CAT scan, which is basically a better and fuller version of X-ray scans. Then we have the PET scan or the PET scan. It's the positron emission tomography scan. It has a very interesting mechanism involving gamma ray emissions, which we will discuss. And then we have the EEG, the electroencephalogram, which is used to record the electrical activity of the brain. So yeah, let's go over each one by one. Next slide, please. Okay, firstly, we take up the EEG or the electroencephalography. As I said, EEG is used to measure the electrical activity of the brain. How it is done is, as you can see in the picture here, many electrodes are placed on the scalp of the patient. They detect electrical activity in the cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex, what it is it's the outermost layer of tissue in our brain, right? So each electrode detects electrical signals of a group of neurons that are active at the same time. So the data we get from it is an image of electrical activity in the brain. And that basically are waves of varying frequency, amplitude, and shape. So yeah, one example of EEG data you can see on your screens. This is the wave obtained from 1 second of EEG signal. You can see it measures brain activity in the order of like milliseconds, right? So that is a very cool thing about EEG. The most important use of this technique that I know of is to detect epilepsy and other brain dysfunctions like sleep disorders, etc. Next slide, please. And now we get to talk about the PET scan. It images brain function. So how that goes about is the patient is injected first with some radioactive substance. That's generally some glucose with isotopic atoms. Like it passes out of the body quickly, so it doesn't do any harm. One example of that is the FDG. It's like a ring structure. It has radioactive fluorine, the F18. So what this glucose does, it releases positrons to become stable. Now these free positrons, they react with the electrons in the surroundings, and this is a phenomenon we all studied in the JEE physics, right? Annihilation. So one positron and one electron combine to release 2 photons or gamma rays, and they speed off in opposite directions, right? So then we detect these photons, and depending on the amount of photons released from each part, we create a distribution of the FDG in the brain. And the distribution of FDG in the brain is basically the image of cerebral blood flow, or it shows which areas of brain are most active. All right, let's move on. So the CAT scan, it is better than the previous two in the sense that it is non-invasive. The past two were invasive techniques. Like in PET scan, you literally injected with a foreign substance. And in the EEG as well, you have all these electrodes placed all over your scalp. So PET scan is more invasive than EEG, but they're both still invasive. So the CT scan, however, is non-invasive. How we go about this is there's an X-ray machine, okay? And you slowly go through it, and a series of detailed X-ray images are taken one after the other, which are combined to construct the complete image of your brain. As simple as that. So it's obviously better than a single X-ray of the brain, but still the resolution of the CT image is not that high. However, it still gets the work done. So like any major problem, like a tumor or some other structural problem, it can be detected by a CT scan. Okay, moving on. Next slide, please. Yeah, now we have the MRI and the fMRI. So as the name suggests, magnetic resonance imaging, it involves applying magnetic field and radio frequency energy waves to the brain. So hydrogen atoms then respond to them by emitting energy. So the machine that is used for MRI scan, it receives the energy and tells you what part of the brain this energy exactly came from. And then, well, it's just putting all the data in your computer, and then it constructs an image of brain with high resolution. So yeah, it creates a high resolution image. In that, it is better than a CT scan. fMRI, it has the same mechanism as well. However, it focuses on different responses as this oxy and deoxyhemoglobin, and what responses they make in response to these magnetic fields and radio frequency energy. So yeah, this oxygenated and deoxygenated blood has unique NMR signal characteristics, or nuclear magnetic resonance signal characteristics, and they used to determine regional brain activity. fMRI also uses bold contrast or the blood oxygen level dependent contrast to identify these changes in blood flow throughout the brain. And that's how it identifies the area of brain that are most active. So yeah, fMRI is non-invasive as well as it provides functional and high resolution MRI images. Next slide, please. So this is it for the neuroscience part of it. If you have any doubts, you can reach out to us or like type in the chat here. That is it for the neuroscience part. Psychology can take over now. Thank you.
Shashwat, over to you.
Just a minute. Just a minute. So hello बच्चों, Shashwat here, and this session will be about psychology. Before we begin, can you identify these two personalities and the characters they represent? Oh, Sherlock Holmes. Yeah, Utkarsh, it's right, Sherlock Holmes. And the other one? Oh, Hannibal, yes. So this is Sherlock Holmes and this is Hannibal. And what things do they have in common? Well, they are both pioneers of psychology. Like you can say Sherlock uses psychology to crack mysteries, and Hannibal uses psychology to catch his prey. So moving on, cognitive science versus cognitive psychology. Cognitive science, it's how humans procure the processes, information, using their senses, experiences, and thoughts. And what is cognitive psychology? It lies at the intersection of psychology and cognitive science. So you can see here, these are the various fields that intersect with cognitive science. And you can you have neurobiology, artificial intelligence, and cognitive psychology. But this is the more mathematical definition. This is समझ में क्या आता है? So to put simply, cognitive psychology is a science how we think. It involves study of various mental processes. And what are the basis of this? The 5 pillars are as follows: biological, cognitive, developmental, social and personality, and mental and physical health. Now, biological aspects include biopsychology or neuroscience, sensation, and consciousness. Cognitive aspects include perception, thinking, intelligence, and memory. Development aspects include learning and lifespan development. Social and personality, now these include social, personality, emotion, and motivation. Mental and physical health, they can be used to diagnose abnormal cases, for giving therapies, and for managing stress, lifestyle, and health. So this is the brief history. Until 1950s, it was thought that mental processes could not be studied, but as it turns out, it's not the case. With the advent of computer science and artificial intelligence, it was noted that a lot of similarities exist between computers and the human brain. Like this is a human brain, and this is on the right side, this is neural networks, which we often use in machine learnings. And it turns out that neural networks are more efficient for performing some computations. So it is here psychology is useful. What do we study in cognitive psychology? Well, we study all these areas: language, thinking and problem solving, attention, perception, human intelligence, and memory. And there are various research opportunities in cognitive psychology. In fact, various researches are going on in the areas of creativity, like how to generate the new novel things, how to generate something new. And you can say that creativity is very useful in research areas. Like it's easy to read up a lot of literature and then reproduce, but creativity is something that is highly valuable. How do we decide? That's really an important thing, because every day we make so many decisions, and how to make the right decisions, what all things are there. Now we can see that there are mathematical aspects of decision making, like game theory, probability, etc. That's also a very useful area. The humor, psychology of humor also exists, and that's also really amazing. Virtual reality and our brains. Now, virtual reality and artificial intelligence. Now, these are the very recent areas, and companies like Google and Apple are investing so much into virtual reality. You can see that Facebook has changed its name to Metaverse, and it's also investing in virtual reality. Now, memory. Now, this is something I would say that is very helpful during mid-semester and semester, and it's also really an important area. Attention. Yes, a lot of research is going on attention as well. Now, why is cognitive psychology becoming so important? This is because now we have more scientific methods of measuring human intellectual capabilities. Like you can find there is something called IQ and IQ tests. And these are also helpful not only in enhancing one's capability, but also for diagnosing various diseases like Alzheimer's. And as we have talked that recent advancements in artificial intelligence are also very helpful. So psychology tests. Now, psychology tests are the scientific approach to measuring human intellectual capabilities. Some popular psychology tests are for depression. We have Beck Depression Inventory, Hamilton Rating Scale for depression, Jung Self-Rating Depression Scale. Now, IQ. This is Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, Wechsler Intelligence Scale for children. These are the two tests. Dementia, Abbreviated Mental Test Score, and Mini Mental State Examination. Personality disorders, we have a mental state examination. Sleep disorders, we have polysomnography. Alzheimer's disease, we have CT, MRI, PET, etc. Bipolar disorder, we have Bipolar Spectrum Diagnostic Scale. Hopelessness, Beck Hopelessness Scale. Attitude, we have Thurston Scale and Likert Scale. Personality type test, it is not a disorder. You can often find various tests for diagnosing personality. It's not a disorder, and we have popular tests called Myers-Briggs type indicator. Now that was a very technical stuff. Now it's time for some fun. What do you see? You can write your answers in the chat box about what is this? What is this picture all about? And there will be choco points for impressing us. Okay, girl. Array, young lady, as well as old lady. Victorian England lady. Okay. So, any more thing? Like, come on, man, try more. Only 4. Elephant. Chidiya, elephant, tsunami, peacock. Okay, so Those are pretty amazing answers right there. And the answer is a young woman and an old woman. And oh, wave. Acha, now this is a psychology test, and it says that if you see a young woman, then you're likely to be an optimistic person or a happy person. And if you saw an old woman, then it means that you have a lot of experience and you are inclined to critically analyze various things. And as who said both? It's Mutasim. So Mutasim, you get choco points. Now, what is this? Skull. Thank you. Mirror, lady and mirror. Okay. Girl, mirror. Woman contemplating about herself. Girl with the mirror. Chair. Evil stepmother from Snow White. Very powerful. Girl with mirror and makeup equipment. Makeup. Redeem your choco points. Yeah, sure, you can contact me. Okay, so here's the spoiler. If you see, it's both a skull and a woman. If you see a skull, then you are a realist person, and you acknowledge the fact that all things are fleeting. Fleeting means worthless. If you see a woman, then you have you're a naive type, innate naive person, and you don't fail to notice threats or problems. What if you see both? Then you are both. Then if you see both, then it's really amazing, because if you see both, then you have a lot of experience. You have both these traits in your personality. And I find a lot of people getting brownie points now. When I first saw this, my perception was this is a girl sharing wine with herself only in the mirror. What do you see? Shubh says me. Okay. Now this is the next puzzle. Now you have koi nahi. Acha. Now you have teddy points for this one. Bird, ostrich, okay, chidiya, hare. Emu bird. Starvation. Okay, social issues. Rabbit. Okay. Whale in ocean, maybe. Rabbit 2. This time you guessed it right. It's a bird and it's a rabbit. It's basically, but none of you said duck. It's actually a duck. I got answers like ostrich, emu. That's also nice. So now what does it say? It says if you see a duck, then the right hemisphere dominates over the left one. That is, you tend to be more humane person. And if you are if you see a rabbit, then the left hemisphere is dominant, and you're technically minded than you are caring. And if you see both duck and a rabbit, then you have a creative personality, powerful imagination, and you can read between the lines. So who said both duck and hare? me. Okay. This is by mistake also. अरे ठीक. Duck and rabbit. Okay, so this is the last one. It's about Tushar. You have to report what all things you can see, everything. Now the one who does this will get QT points. Cat coming towards the stairs, cat coming down. पीछे मैट बहुत साफ. अरे ये सही. Cat coming upstairs, cat coming down or up, cat and peacock. Cat coming both up and down, cat and bird. Oh, nice. Both up and down can be observed. Both noun. Yeah, it is. Cat can be climbing upstairs and moving downstairs. Yes, exactly. And this is called perspective in art, and you can see it both ways. Cat was climbing the steps. It means that you take things very quickly and are tend to be a disorganized person. But the good thing about this that it liberates you from cynicism and worry. And if the cat was descending the steps, it means that you are very attentive and have great intuition. You tend to be more you tend to more rely on things that are tangible and rely less on the luck. So that was the last piece. Now this is a disclaimer. You can read this, but I would say that these tests are suggestive, and it does not mean that if you have told the correct answer, that means your personality is like that only. Actual determination of one's personality is very complex process and requires a great expertise in that domain. It was just a puzzle for fun and nothing more. So don't think like, okay, I answered this and I'm like this. So with this, we come to the end of psychology session, and this is the credits. These are our group leaders, Mohit and Shivanshu, and these were the Sekis that helped me create this PPT: Sarah, Akansha, Tanush, and me, Shashwat. Okay, so any questions? How many psychopaths were there in the first slide of the lecture? हाँ भाई बताओ. Please show the first slide. Okay.
Yeah,
From
sorry,
Bhadrav.
yeah.
So the answer is 2. There are 2 high functioning sociopaths.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the answer I was looking for. Yeah, you get milkshake points from me, Anirudh.
And Anirudh, be sure to collect those points. Okay. So, of course. So with this, we conclude the psychology session. Now there will be an AI session. Peace out.
Dhanit, please share the screen. So, hello everyone. Myself Tanushree. I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence. So, we all know it's a very popular term nowadays. And along with the slides, we'll get more insights into the interesting topic. So, artificial intelligence. It is the study of how human brain think, learn, and work. It's an approach to make a computer, a robot, or a product to think how smart human can think. And finally, the study outputs intelligent and software systems. So I hope all of you can see the following Venn diagram, which shows how the terms AI, machine learning, deep learning, and reinforcement learning are correlated. We'll learn about each of them as in to get a very basic idea of all these terms. Next slide, please. Machine learning. Machine learning is a subcategory of artificial intelligence. It effectively automates the process of analytical model building and allows machines to adapt new scenario independently. Machine learning is broadly divided into three categories. You can see supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning. So firstly, we'll look on to supervised learning. Please, next slide. Supervised learning. We first train the model by feeding data sets. The training data sets includes both the input and the correct output, which is used to teach the models, and then the mathematical model get training according to the data set, and then it gets the correct output. Now we'll look on to unsupervised learning. Next slide. Here, we do not know the label data. Like for example, in supervised learning, we were having an input both X and Y, which were the input and the label data. Here, we do not have the labeling. And it's more about inferring from the data by looking at the similarities and the patterns of the data set. And then it does clustering and then separates the models according to the patterns. And then we know the output finally. So it involves three steps, which are the first one is exploring the data set and then detecting patterns. The second is extracting important points from the information and then implementing this into the operation for accurate results. Now we'll learn something about reinforcement learning. In reinforcement learning, we usually have an agent who is rewarded upon completing the certain challenges. It differs from supervised learning as in a way that supervised learning trains the data to find solutions. Right? We have seen the example too. But here in reinforcement learning decides what to do in a given situation, learning from the experiences. Like for example, all of you might be playing video games. There you have an enemy. When you kill that enemy, you get some reward points. And when you're not able to kill that enemy, you get negative reward points or maybe no reward points at all. So the cycle continues and then we get the output accordingly by learning from the experiences. It gets well trained. So that's all about reinforcement learning. We'll get on to deep learning. So deep learning, we all know that it's a subset of machine learning, which is essentially a neural network with multiple layers. These multiple neural networks attempts to stimulate behavior of human brain. We have multiple layers to progressively extract higher level features from the raw input. The real life examples of deep learning includes vision for driverless cars. So all of you must have heard about driverless cars. So the application of deep learning is there as in the vision of that driverless car. And then the next application is face recognition and then automatic translation. Now let's look on to a nice application of artificial intelligence, which is Psych. Psych is a long-term artificial intelligence project that aims to assemble a comprehensive ontology knowledge that spans the basic concepts and rules, how the world works. It focuses on implicit knowledge and common sense knowledge that the other artificial intelligence platforms may take for granted. It enables semantic reasoners to perform human-like reasoning. We have a short clip which will explain psych in detail. I hope all of you enjoy it. Dhanit, please play the clip. Wait, voice is not shared, I think.
Problems. Today, we have access to unprecedented amounts of data. Data we know can help us solve the world's most challenging problems. But what happens when the complexity and volume of information we can access surpasses what data scientists, traditional analytics, and narrow artificial intelligence can interpret? How do we understand data and translate it into meaningful action? These are precisely the questions we started asking 30 years ago. In 1981, a small group of computer scientists started working toward a shared vision of building an intelligent system that could use real-world knowledge to understand the data it was interpreting. After hundreds of millions of dollars and millions of PhD hours, that vision is fully realized. Meet Psych. Psych is an artificial intelligence system for enterprise that brings human-like understanding and reasoning to complex systems, and unprecedented depth, speed, and scalability to human thought. Psych is the world's largest, smartest common sense knowledge base. By applying intelligent reasoning and common sense to data and knowledge, Psych can help you understand and solve the world's most challenging business problems. Psych helped the Cleveland Clinic sift through 5 million patient records to find the perfect 82 drug trial candidates for a new cardiovascular therapy. A search like this usually takes 10 weeks. It took Psych 10 minutes. Psych boosted yields on deep water platforms for a multinational oil company by 10%. Just as importantly, Psych made oil production safer for both workers and the environment. Since the financial crisis of 2008, banks have faced fines of over $250 billion. Psych-based intelligence helped a large global bank create a compliance application to prevent potential losses, regulatory penalties, and market cap hits. At Lucid, we're in the business of putting Psych to work for enterprise. How might Psych work for you? Welcome to the future of problem solving. Welcome to the age of intelligent action.
So right now we just had an overview and a basic knowledge about the terms. If any of you have any doubts or something to ask, we can address them. If any, like, you can either use the chat section or just unmute yourself. Or otherwise, we'll have workshops, so you'll get more idea and more details into the ECS club, into the workshops too. I think, Donat, you can continue from here if no one wants to ask anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, hello everyone.
Wait, someone's asking when will the workshop begin? So it will be in the December only. You will get to know about it soon through mail, and also for updates you can join the Discord server link, which I think Sarah has shared in the chat box. Yeah.
Yeah, so hello everyone. I'm Dhwanit, and now we are going to discuss some of the amazing applications of AI. Like when you saw Psych, we have some more in the back for you. So neuroradiology. So what is radiology? Basically, it is the science of that focuses on diagnosis and characterization of abnormalities in the body, under which there is a section known as neuroradiology that focuses basically on central and peripheral nervous system, spine, and head and neck. This uses neuroimaging techniques that you saw back, like the CAT scan, MRI, EEG signals, etc. So how can we use AI in this? First, we have, like, we all have went to the labs and taken X-rays and CT scans. And when the scan comes, we have to wait for the doctor to tell us what is the problem with the brain or anything else. So how would it be like if we upload the photo in an application and that application gives us what is the abnormality in that scan? So like there are computer vision techniques for detection and segmentation of anatomical structures. Like if in a brain you see there are tumors and hemorrhages, we can train different AI models on this, and we can get to know how much there is a chance that we have that tumor just by inputting that image into a simple application. So how good is that? Second thing is, we all have heard about the harmfulness of CT scans and MRIs. So let's see. In the left image, you can see that there is a bright white spot, which is a meningioma. That is a type of tumor, brain tumor. But the same thing is missing in the right image. The image is, both these images are of the brain are of the same brain, taken at the same time. But what is the difference? The difference is in the right image, the dose is quite less, which leads to which doesn't make the tumor glow up. The glowing up is due to the contrast that is used in MRI. So if we reduce the dose, we can't see the image. But how can we improve this? How can we get the contrast by using less dose? So we can train an AI that takes in the low dose image and outputs us the left image. So like this. Now in this image, we can clearly see the meningioma, though still the dose is quite less. The change is this image is generated by the deep learning model, which took in the low dose image from the previous slide and did some pre-processing on it. So what is the pre-processing? We train a supervised model which takes in low dose images and also the high dose images, and we train the model on both these X and Y parameters. And finally, we have a model that has its own weights. So if we give it a low dose image, it gives us a high dose image. So which has the tumor enlightened like this. So that's for radiology. So next we have GPT-3. So what is GPT-3? It is a pre-trained model that uses deep learning to produce human-like text. It is a language prediction model that helps to write code in a very easy way. So we have a video on it. So that was it. So I hope you liked it. So this GPT-3 model is made by a company known as OpenAI, and this model can be used to even make games. You can just write like make a game that does this, and I have seen it generate the whole code for the game just in a few seconds of time. So this model is so good that it just leaves all similar models that have came in the past way behind. So that's it from our side in the AI team, and we can have some questions. And
You can all put your questions in the chat and we'll answer them.
Sorry, could you allow them to unmute and ask questions if that's possible?
Okay, I'll do that. Okay, so you can unmute one by one and ask your questions.
Hello. Yeah, so I in one of the orientation sessions, I came to know that undergraduate students can be part of research in cognitive science. So I was wondering if I could just get a rough idea of what kind of research we can invest ourselves into.
We do offer projects under the SNT Council. So in those projects, we try to like I can speak for the one that I personally did. We try to recreate an already existing paper, and we try to recreate the results of of already done research, right? So we as students we get to learn more about how these things work, right? So it's a really good opportunity if you're interested in that kind of thing.
Oh, right. Also, I wanted to know that since we are a technical institution, I would assume that most of what we focus on would be related to AI and human machine interface.
Yeah,
But
especially yeah. I'm sorry, please. I'm sorry for
oh, I
interrupting.
just wanted to know whether the society has something to offer for people more interested in the psychological or philosophical side of things.
We do projects related to when we're doing projects, it's typically not yeah, we're like broad in a broad sense we're related to cognitive science, right? So if you join up with us, you will get to explore, like you will get to do these things on yourselves, right, by your own accord. So uh, in the existing like status quo, we do explore things that we're interested in. So if you join up, you could do things in cognitive science.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, does anyone else have questions?
What things we could talk about in workshops?
I'm sorry, Ankush, could you repeat?
Ankush, your voice is not audible. Maybe you could write it in the chat.
So how much time do we need like to prepare to participate in the project or something, like to get the prerequisite knowledge on an average?
Like typically in our projects, you especially as first years, you won't need much of prerequisites. We'll do things from the bottoms up, right? Like projects are a thing which are going to be approaching in the near future. We'll tell you like when the time approaches, we'll tell you in detail what kind of things you'll be required to know or beforehand. But right now, I don't think you need to worry about learning any extra skills so that that will help you during the project.
And also, I believe there are probably, what do you say, open electives and stuff that related to this thing, right? You people will guide us on that, right? Like, who can I get in touch with if I have questions of that sort?
There is a cognitive science department at IIT, and there are courses that you can take which are related to cognitive neuroscience, right? But officially, like the BCS does not have any part in we have seniors. See the main benefit that you'll get from being involved with the BCS is that you'll get to meet like-minded people who are also interested in things like neuroscience and cognitive science, right? So it's highly likely that you'll meet some senior who has already done courses and in those fields and has taken electives, and probably maybe they're even trying to build a career in cognitive and neuroscience, right? So that's a big advantage. You can get to interact with those people, and they'll be able to guide you. But yeah, but officially we're not going to be there's no such thing like that. The BCS will tell you to take up this course or that course. That's not going to happen.
Does the society include masters and PhD students as well, or only undergraduates?
Yeah. There are PG students are also involved in the BCS.
Okay.
See, the way clubs in IITK work are like as compared to other IITs, we don't have a formal membership system, right? It's not like you're going to be registered as a member of the BCS. When we conduct these sessions and workshops and projects, right, you can sign up when that time comes, and at that time you will be involved completely in the project or the workshop which you are attending, and you can join up on a case-by-case basis. It's not like you're going to be a registered member of the BCS. There's no such thing. So yeah, there are like master students do take part in our projects and events. Yeah, obviously. You will get to meet many like PG students who are interested in cognitive science in the some of them are even from the Department of Cognitive Science in the Discord server itself.
If I have like more general or like if I want to stay in touch with like senior master students or anyone who can help me with that, like what should be my point of contact? Discord, right?
Yeah. On the Discord server, you can find all of us, like all of our accounts. Most of it, like a lot of us are active on Discord, and I also sent the link of our website on the in the chat, I think. Wait, let me just send it again.
You can DM any of the group secretary, the group leaders, so no pressure.
Yeah, exactly. Where in the end हम लोग भी तो बच्चे ही हैं यार, ऐसे लोग कॉलेज के लौंडे हैं, कर लो भाई कभी
सबसे एक साल बड़े हैं तो इतना लोड मत लो.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't need to go through any like formal channels of communication to get to us. बाकी से discuss करते हैं like what specifically all of you are still around, so what specific parts of cognitive and neuroscience are you interested in? Like what made you come to this session in the first place?
Functioning of brain and about psychology and philosophy I'm much interested in, and by luck I got also HSS of psychology.
Nice. Yeah, like while we're on the topic, I'd like to because the thing that makes BCS so exciting for me is that it's such a vast subject, right? So the in my first year, the project that I did was involved, like it was related to neuroeconomics, right? So economics is not something that you typically expect to be related to cognitive science, but that's just the way it works. So I think there's it's really interesting about one really interesting thing about BCS is when we conduct these sessions, we conduct these journal club events, right, where we invite actual researchers who are working in neuro and cognitive science, and then they talk to us about their research. We ask them questions about their research, and when you talk to them, that's when you really get to know that how actually vast this field is, right? And it's really exciting to me. Ankush, you're interested in how you can apply functions of brain in other areas. Yeah. As in fact, as I said in my presentation, it's a really happening field. Like neurotech is really In fact, I think we're also planning to do something related to neurotech in the near future, right? But yeah, I mean, functions of the brain being applied in other areas. Yeah, you'll get to learn more about that here. Yeah.
If I just want to stay in touch with the field, can you recommend any book or a YouTube channel or something? Because I have a general interest.
I'm sorry, please. मेरे side से कोई दिक्कत थी?
Like
Could
I
you-
have,
Yeah,
I have like a
so we
general
have,
interest in.
yeah, we have a resources section on our Discord server. There you can find many books related to this, and there is a whole spreadsheet consisting of resources, how you can study various concepts.
Yeah.
No, okay, thank you.
We're also, if you're interested in taking part in competitions related to neuro and computer science, then our Discord server there, we also like post updates about this competition is happening. We also form teams to take part in different competitions, right? So if that's something you're interested in, that's BCS, like our server is a great place to start. So I think you must have gotten a flavor of what like we're about by now. Right? We're just a like aggregation of people who are interested in these things, and because we're just bound together by our common interests. So there's no formal like membership or something like that. You can take part in the events that you're interested in. You can you can do anything related to our field of interest as you want when you want. Right? So that's a great plus point for our club, like for most of the clubs at IIT. So all of you are like UGY 21s only, right?
Yeah.
Nice.
So further on, can I do like my UG project or what do you say, the final year project in a?
There are professors at IITK who are doing like I think I'm like I'll be able to answer that because I'm also interested in I'm also interested in doing these things at IITK, right? So I actually like recently I tried to find out about the professors who were working in cognitive science or neuroscience at IITK, and yeah, there are many professors who are already interested in this field and they're doing active research in these fields, right? And there's a huge variety of professors that you'll find. Like you can find someone doing something in neurotech, someone in human computer interfaces, and someone in cognitive. Like there's even a professor in pure cognitive science. There are multiple professors who are working in pure cognitive sciences, right? So yeah, there are ample opportunities for you to do that kind of thing at IIT.
Okay, thank you.
So if there are no more questions, should we wrap up the session?
Yeah, it was great like talking to you guys, right? We'll just wrap up now. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone. Bye.